Good morning and welcome to this week's episode of Iconic Freedom, The Formula. Here we set a standard for accountability and responsibility, the ownership of your choices and your outcomes and everything that follows. Let each care for self and all will be cared for. So when I talk about the formula, we talk about that periodic chart that you see on the various websites that this is posted on, where you create those elements that come together and bring harmony to your life. And if one of those elements in your life is not working, then you extract it and you reevaluate it and, again, bring that harmony to your life. Over the past few weeks, we've been following a progression. So we began by observing that reality responds. Then we explored how we become capable of seeing reality more clearly by becoming responsible, that we own our choices. Last week we asked, what is the purpose of seeing? And today I'd like to ask a little bit different question. What exactly are we seeing? Because I thought about this and I think that reality presents isolated events. At least that's what we think. But I think that it presents a recurring relationship. And I think the recurring relationship quietly becomes the patterns that shape our lives. And I think the current recurring relationship is basically with ourselves and what we observe. The beginner will see events. When we're young or we're simply inexperienced, life often appears random. I know that I used to think that. Often, one difficult relationship, one financial setback, one success, one disappointment, each feels disconnected from the other experiences, almost like they're accidental and you're bumping into things. But again, I think the beginner sees these as isolated events. And I know that I used to do that, but the developing observer that I feel like I keep becoming, I keep asking a different question every time. What do these experiences have in common? I mean, I have moved to a place now where I don't even ask the question. I just kind of observe what's going on. I make my choices based on what I know my own self-interest is and my own enjoyment. It's not that it is a little bit, a little bit of a way that, I can't really be bothered about trying to take care of other people. I can't take care of their experiences. I can't carry, their burdens. I'm not going to do that. Let each care for self and all will be cared for. But I think that relationships reveal patterns. And at first we notice two similar situations. Wow, that's interesting. When I broke up with that person and then I got into this other relationship, they seem very similar. Or when I went to that boss and now I have this new boss, and then 3 of them look the same, and now 10 of them. And then eventually, I think we stop seeing them as separate events. And I think we begin recognizing the relationships between the choices we make and the experiences we're having. And I think a choice repeatedly produces a similar outcome. An attitude repeatedly creates a similar experience. Avoidance repeatedly delays your growth. Honesty repeatedly increases clarity. Capability, I think, repeatedly increases your freedom. The more capable you are, the more independent you become. The more independent you become, the less you have to rely on others. You rely on self. Why? Because life is a path of one. Responsibility that is repeated expands the trust in yourself. And I don't think any of these are isolated, not that I can tell. They're recurring relationships with self, and recurring relationships become recognizable patterns. When a choice repeatedly appears effective, it becomes increasingly likely to be repeated. Repeated choices establish recurring patterns. And I think reality continually reveals whether those patterns correspond with reality or they merely seem to. Because I think that when a person, what I observe is anything in life, right? You see it in animals, you see it in people. When you do something and you think that you are gaining something from it, you have a propensity to do it again and again and again. And even if it's successful once, but it's not successful the next 10 times, you keep hoping each time that it will be. Can you say Las Vegas? Can you say gambling? Because you win on one, now you think, great, I'm going to win again. I'm going to win again. And if the winning is intermittent and you never know when it's going to happen, in a way, it's kind of like an abusive relationship, right? But I don't think reality is random. I don't observe it that way. People will often ask, how did you know that that would happen? And I think the answer is usually it isn't prediction, it's recognition. I've seen this type of relationship before. I've seen this choice produce similar outcomes before. I've watched this pattern unfold enough times that it no longer surprises me. And it's not because I possess some special insight, because reality continues responding consistently. Reality isn't random, it's relational to your choice. And it doesn't care what your choice is, right? It's just responding to your choice. You know, when you meet someone, you might say, they remind me of so and so. And the reason? Because you've recognized similar traits, qualities, behaviors, or ways of interacting. You're recognizing, say it with me, a pattern. So, the architecture of reality, well, what is it? Think of an architect walking into an unfinished building. And maybe at first glance, it looks like, there's scattered beams and concrete and steel and drywall and, this supposed, universe in chaos. There's random pieces everywhere, but to the architect, there's structure because each beam relates to another. Each wall supports another. Each measurement exists in relationship to the whole. And reality is much the same. Out of seemingly chaos comes organization. And what happens when the architect sees something that will not fit, that will not work? Gets rid of it. Doesn't even think about it. This isn't going to work, get rid of it. Much in the same way your life unfolds. You don't find something that's working, get rid of it. Let it go. When observation, I think, becomes increasingly comprehensive, the apparent randomness begins organizing itself into what I call understandable relationships. Those relationships reveal the architecture that was present all along. You just didn't know it. Observation reveals relationships. Relationships reveal patterns. Patterns inform increasingly accurate participation in reality. The more you recognize your own bias, your own choices, your own preferences, then when you go to choose, you start to see, I always go for that. That's interesting. What's behind that? And you do it initially because you're trying to figure out yourself. You're trying to know yourself. After a while, you stop doing it because you realize that the choices you're making are quality, and you're not going to choose anything that's not quality. So patterns are nothing more than information. And I think this is where sometimes people become uncomfortable. They hear the word pattern and then they immediately start thinking about judgment and stuff like that. But that's not really what I'm talking about. Patterns are information, nothing more. If I notice repeatedly I interrupt people, that's information. If I repeatedly avoid difficult conversation, that's information. If I consistently become healthier when I exercise, that's more information. The purpose isn't condemnation, right? It's not to beat yourself up and do some sort of self-flogging. It's correspondence, it's communication. The more accurately I describe recurring relationships with choices, the more accurately I can participate in reality. And when I say recurring relationships, I don't just mean with people, with everything. What kind of a relationship do you have with your money, with food, with movement, with exercise? You know, driving a car, how you drive, the choices you make. A living relationship can be a beautiful thing. The beautiful part is this: patterns are never the destination, they're the feedback. Reality will continually provide you new information. Every choice creates another observation, and then every observation refines your understanding of you. And then I think every refinement informs the next choice. Life is not static. Reality is. And what do I mean by that? Reality is what it is in that sense that it's static. It's always that. It's not trying to be all of this wishy-washy stuff. As our observation develops, I think our participation develops with it. Next week, I know that I'd like to explore another question. And once we begin recognizing patterns, then my question is, which patterns can we trust about ourselves? Because not every apparent pattern actually corresponds with reality. Sometimes we're recognizing distortion and not really reality. We might be recognizing, a truth, maybe not. Maybe it's another distortion. But you have to know your own bias. You have to know who you are. And once you get to know who you are, then it just becomes like getting up from a chair and walking across the room. You don't even think about it. You just go do it. But in the beginning stages, when you're learning to walk, right, what do you have to do? First, you sit up. Then you figure out your balance. Then you start to crawl. Then you pull yourself up. Then you start to walk. All of these things take time. And then after a while, you stop even thinking about it. I think that emotion brings attention to things. And it's one of the things that distorts reality. And it even distorts the patterns. Because I think emotion brings attention. And in a sense, I think it says, did you see that? Now, I projected that on there, right? That was my thing, because that's what I think it does, is it's that indicator to me, pay attention. But I think emotion is often way overvalued, given way too much beyond its value. Reality simply exists. It's the universe in which you exist and live. Whether we choose to correspond with it belongs entirely to us. You don't have to think about any of this. You don't have to listen to this podcast. You don't have to follow anything. You can just go do whatever you want. And as you keep bumping into things in life, you're going to hearken back to these conversations. And you'd be like, maybe that wasn't so crazy. Maybe there's something there. Reality is not hiding itself. People are hiding from it, or they're trying to hide it, but it's always going to reveal itself. It quietly presents recurring relationships, recurring patterns. And I this invitation for you to come and listen to this podcast and to hear, these thoughts and observation, it isn't to memorize these things. It's to observe and then to participate. to continue refining the observer, which is you, because every comprehensive observation, every recurring relationship, every recognizable pattern becomes another opportunity to align yourself with reality itself, with existence itself. Somehow, um, the people in life that are very unhealthy want to convince people somehow that there is subjective reality and objective reality, giving subjective an unhealthy value over objective reality. And it's damaging. Subjective reality is simply just an avoidance of responsibility. You're being subjective about what you're observing because you don't want to take on the responsibility of knowing the reality. Because once you know the reality, now you have to do something. And not doing something is still doing something. It's avoiding, right? Reality makes no distinction between joy and suffering. It doesn't know those things. We're the ones that project that. It's just existing. Those distinctions belong to you, the observer, the participant. Observation describes the reality in a sense that you're watching the movie. The experience describes the participant. If you say you're having an experience, it's because you're having an emotion. It's like Groundhog Day. You just keep doing it over and over and over again. But if you pay attention, what did the lead character in Groundhog Day do? He learned things and he figured it out after a while. Don't confuse what you feel with what is real. Because whatever you're feeling is pulling you out of reality. Whatever you're observing objectively is what is real. Get to know yourself. Know your default habits and responding. And just by observation, get to know yourself. Okay, so until next time, I want to say thank you for joining me on this week's episode of The Formula. Hey, listen, the links to my website, books, podcasts, platforms are all below, including the Christmas cookie. Holidays are coming up. And I say that it's a collection of stories that I think it reminds us that ordinary moments, they often reveal, I think, extraordinary truths, extraordinary moments of reality. And until next time, be observant and remember, reality responds to the choices you make. Let each care for self, and all will be cared for. Make it a great week.